Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our data protection webinar on how to protect against ransomware. We will get started in 2 minutes. Okay, thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining our data protection webinar on how to protect against ransomware. My name is Ian Evans. I am the President and CEO of eTech. I will be your host for our webinar today. The webinar will go for an hour. In this webinar, we will discuss definition of ransomware and its history, how ransomware infects small business and nonprofits around the globe, how to protect yourself and recover. We'll talk about top ransomware stats globally from 2017, cybersecurity tips for your staff, and how human error is a leading cause of data loss. Before we get started, please note this webinar will be recorded. We will be sending out links to all attendees tomorrow. If you have any questions, please enter it in the chat window. We will answer your questions at the end of the session. Please note, this webinar is in listen-only mode. Before I hand it over to Mike, eTech has been providing system support and technology consulting services to our clients since 1991. We are a wholly Canadian-owned and operated corporation, attributing our strength and success to our close working relationship with each and every one of our clients, regardless of size. We help not-for-profits, regulatory body, and small business thrive by delivering data protection, managed cloud hosting services, cybersecurity awareness and protection, IT support solutions, and web design services. eTech is a VIP partner of Datto. Datto is an innovative provider of comprehensive backup, recovery, and business continuity solutions used by thousands of organizations worldwide. We have deployed many data protection solutions for clients in Canada and the United States. We host and support diverse industry websites. Our hosting services team delivers customized configurations from simple website hosting to mission-critical e-commerce and database hosting services on shared, virtual, and dedicated servers. Our not-for-profit client base ranges from professional membership to construction and infrastructure, regulatory bodies, real estate property, financial services, transit, public safety, and healthcare services. I would like to now welcome Michael De Palma. Michael is the Channel Development Manager from Datto. Thank you. Michael?
All right, thank you very much, Ian. So my name is Mike De Palma, Channel Development Manager with Datto. Quick story about Datto. If you haven't heard of us, we are a backup and disaster recovery company based out of Norwalk, Connecticut. Celebrated our 10-year anniversary last year. We are up over 1,400 employees worldwide, and we do have an office out in East Toronto. Opened that office about 5 years ago, so we've got a very strong Canadian presence. We protect over 390 petabytes of data throughout the world. We've got 9 data centers around the world. And one of the questions I always get when I'm up in Canada is, are you sending the data back down to the States? And the answer is no. We actually have 2 data centers here in Canada, which is very important. I'm going to get to the importance of those actual locations, but we've got one out in Calgary, one in Toronto. So they are on opposite sides of the country, which is very critical. But again, the idea here is to keep the data in the country in which it originates. So we've got 2 data centers down in the States, 2 up here in Canada, and then we've got 4 throughout Europe, and a couple in Southeast Asia, and then one out in Australia. So the idea is that we're going to keep it in the country where it originates, and we're going to have multiple copies of your data. And you're going to see why that's a key component to fighting these criminals out there. And so the idea here is kind of to rethink backup, because for years people have been really just viewing backup as this insurance policy, right? I need a second copy of my data, and they're not really thinking about how backup really fits into your cybersecurity plan. Obviously, a cybersecurity plan is a multi-layered approach, and you can talk to Ian and his team about that. But at the end of the day, your backup is your last line of defense. And so, to get into where that fits in, let's just start out right at the top. What is ransomware? Although it's been in the news a lot lately, there are still some misconceptions. One of the things that most people think is, okay, they're stealing my data. And that's actually not the case with just traditional ransomware viruses. What they're doing is they're just encrypting your files. And in order to get those files back, in order to get that encryption key, you're going to have to pay some form of ransom. Now, they're always going to demand the money in Bitcoin, mostly because obviously it's anonymous, and it's kind of a universal worldwide currency that they can get because they're attacking companies all throughout the world. But the idea here is they know that if they're demanding the money in Bitcoin and it's coming to them, the authorities have very little chance of ever catching them because it's an anonymous currency. And what's important to think about with ransomware and why it's so prevalent in all shapes and forms and all type of businesses and really all countries around the world is in its simplicity. It used to be that the only companies that were getting attacked by these criminals were companies that had very valuable data on its own, right? Whether it's financial information that these criminals could use just to extract money directly from you, personal information, obviously, that could be used for identity theft and kind of bought and sold on the dark web. Well, with ransomware, that kind of flips the strategy right on its head, because with ransomware, what they're saying is, we don't care what kind of business you're in. We don't care if you're a Fortune 500 company or a one-man shop. We just know that the data that you have is extremely important to you and your business, and you can't live without it. So if we encrypt it, we know that we're going to get you to pay, right? And so now they have the ability to cast a very huge net and really go after any business of any kind and know that there's a good chance, A, they're not going to have the right protections in place, and B, that you're going to have to pay. And so it's important to really know who's behind these attacks, because this is the second misconception that we see all the time. There's still this kind of perception out there that, yeah, these are just the guy in his basement, right? The guy in his basement who spends some of his time, a few hours every day, doing these little hacks. They can go online and brag to their friends and maybe make a few extra bucks on the side. The problem is this is not who is behind those attacks. Maybe it was back in ransomware's infancy, but this whole industry, which is a large industry worldwide, has really been taken over by organized crime. And that's organized crime here in North America, organized crime in Russia and Eastern Europe and China, really all over the world. Organized crime has seized on this because they know it's an easy way to make a lot of money, and there's very little chance they're going to get caught. And so when you really look at the evolution of ransomware, what's interesting is ransomware has been around since 1989. That was the first known case. And over the next 2 decades, we'd see it pop up here and there, and you might see some cases of it, but it really wasn't a huge epidemic. And what this chart is showing you are the more prevalent variants of ransomware out there. The FBI and really authorities all over the world, they estimate that about 4 million variants exist out there. And so, people are always asking me and the authorities, like, okay, what are the authorities around the world doing to combat this stuff? And the simple answer is there's little they could do. They can go and they could try to isolate one of these particular variants. And it might get them a nice news story and a nice pat on the back, but it really isn't going to have much impact because now they've got 3,999,000 to go. And so these are some of the more prevalent ones, some of the ones you might have heard of, right? CryptoLocker, obviously WannaCry we saw the middle of last year, Locky, some of the more prevalent ones. But when you look at it, really what caused it to all of a sudden start to spike in 2013? What was the catalyst for that? If it's been around for 2 decades, why all of a sudden in 2013, 2014 and beyond are we seeing such an explosion? Well, one is the point I just brought up, that organized crime has stepped in and really taken over and made it much more sophisticated, and the structure is actually structured more like a business than a guy in his basement. But really, the reason why organized crime stepped in and said, hey, this is where we need to be going forward, is Bitcoin. Right? Bitcoin is something that obviously has been in the news a lot lately because of the huge spike in the price and then the subsequent fall and all of the rest. But Bitcoin's been around for several years, and its anonymity is really what made it so attractive to criminals of all kinds, not just in the ransomware sphere, but some other really nefarious things going on in the dark web. And what's interesting about Bitcoin, for those of you not familiar with it, right? So it's an online currency, completely anonymous. And it was really created for this kind of utopian idea of, okay, we're going to have this online currency, right? And it's not going to be something that federal banks and governments from around the world can artificially inflate or deflate. It's truly going to be a currency that's run by true market factors, right? It's going to go up and it's going to go down based on the actual market. That was the idea behind it. And that's why it needed to be anonymous, because they didn't want governments to step in. But that anonymity made it so attractive to these criminals. And they latched on to the fact that, hey, we've got this ransomware virus, which we see the potential in, but we don't really know how to monetize it, right? Because you can't just ask for a credit card, because that might get traced back to them, or the credit card company can reverse the charge, or even ACH can get tracked back, or PayPal, or one of these type of things. With Bitcoin, they knew that we can ask for money in this currency and we're not going to get caught. And so I've been going around telling ransomware stories really all throughout the world over the last couple of years. And 2 years ago, I gave a presentation in front of a large group, and you'd get a couple head nods, and you could tell people not really understanding what I was saying. And then as the years went on, more and more head nods would occur out in the crowd, and more people either were impacted by ransomware or had a friend or a competitor or a vendor that was hit with ransomware, and more people saw it. And what was very surprising to us is as it went on, people still, even though they knew about it, weren't putting a lot of protections in place. And that all really came to a head last year when we saw that WannaCry attack. Now, after that WannaCry attack, everybody at least has heard of ransomware, right? This was a story that was on the front page of every newspaper throughout the world. It was on every lead story on every website, regardless of whether you got your news. We've never really seen anything like it. We saw 220,000 computers around the world in a single day, 150 countries impacted by a single virus in a single day. And it was, everywhere you lived, you're impacted, right? I mean, the biggest one up in Canada, there was a hospital in Ontario that was hit with ransomware. That made a lot of news. And that's what you will see commonly, right? The news will pick up the large stories, the big companies that are hit, universities, hospitals, those type of things, municipalities. But in reality, everyone is impacted down to the small business. And so when you start looking at this, and this particular impact, the IT community originally thought, okay, this was just a test, because what was very interesting about the WannaCry attack was they impacted a lot of businesses all throughout the world, but they were only asking for $300 in Bitcoin, regardless of the size of your company. A lot of these variants will try to figure out the size of your company, the type of industry you're in, where you're located, and they're going to adjust their ransom based on that. This particular variant, luckily for the consumers, was they just non-discriminately just said, okay, this is $300 across the board. And so the IT community basically thought, okay, this was a test. They wanted to see how many computers they could impact in a single day, get that box checked off, and then they're going to say, okay, the next phase is going to be, we're going to really try to monetize this. And I was actually down in Pennsylvania doing a presentation alongside a gentleman from the FBI down there. He was out of the Philadelphia office. And he said, the FBI's got two main theories. The first theory was the one that we just discussed and that the IT community really latched onto. And the second theory was a little bit different. And it was one that I hadn't thought of. And even when this gentleman was talking about it, I didn't really believe in it. But as the months went on, this theory became more and more credible. And the second theory was the criminals never really cared how many people paid the ransom. Anything that they made in those ransomware payments was pure gravy. And the estimates from around the world were it was really only $300,000, which may seem like a very large number, but in the grand scope of things, that's not a lot of money. So the theory is that the criminals never really cared about what they made in ransomware. They never really cared if they gave your data back or not. What they really cared about was increasing the price of Bitcoin. Now remember, these criminals have been gathering Bitcoin over the last several years when, through these attacks, through other criminal activities, and throughout that time, the cost of Bitcoin has remained pretty flat. You might see it spike up to $100 or a couple $100 and it'd come back down, but we were really living in a world where Bitcoin was somewhere in the $200 to $600 range for a long time. And when you look at where it was on January 1st, 2016, it was 558 Canadian dollars. We saw a slight uptick over the course of the following year, and in January 1st, 2017, it was about 1,200 Canadian dollars. And then you start to see that first big spike. And that was in May of 2017 when this WannaCry attack hit, because what was happening was these large corporations, mostly in Europe, but really all over the world, they were thinking the same thing we were thinking. This was a test, and the next big wave is going to come. And they knew they were going to be asked for money in Bitcoin. So they started gobbling up as much Bitcoin as they possibly could in preparation for, okay, if we get hit with ransomware and we're stuck in a position where we can't recover, we're going to have to pay this ransom. And we want to be prepared. Because for those of you out there that haven't dealt with Bitcoin before, it's not something that you could just go walk into your bank and say, I want to go purchase Bitcoin. Really, it could take several days. My department in Datto, there's 4 of us. We go around and we do these presentations. We actually got Bitcoin accounts set up and we're funded by Datto just for the sake of, hey, we go around and we talk about it. Now we could talk more intelligently about it. And this happened back in August, and we got an email, okay, set up your account, give us your encrypted account number, we'll fund the account. And then we got an email, okay, the deposit is made. It took 6 days for that deposit to actually hit my account. Now, there's ways you can accelerate it by paying more money, but the idea here is if you get hit with ransomware and you weren't prepared with a Bitcoin account, even if you wanted to pay, you still were looking at several days of downtime. And so these companies were trying to stay ahead of the curve. And once you saw these large corporations start to buy Bitcoin and the price started going up, now you did see some financial services saying, hey, maybe we should move some money over. And then we started seeing the news story and it started piling up, right? And you started now seeing these this price really skyrocket. And on January 1st of this year, a single Bitcoin was over 19,000 Canadian dollars. So we saw it rise from 1,200 on January 1st, 2017 to over $19,000 in just 1 year's time. And you could read the news and you're going to see the stories of some savvy investor that became a multi-millionaire overnight, or some teenage kid who was a techie and figured I can get in some Bitcoin for a few $1,000s when it was only a couple $100s for a Bitcoin, and now they're a millionaire overnight. And those are the stories that you hear. But the reality of this big spike in Bitcoin, and I know it's come way down, but the reality of it is the people that became multi-millionaires overnight and over the course of a couple months were the criminals. Remember, they've been gathering this Bitcoin for years. They've been doing these ransomware attacks really since 2013, and they've picked up pace. And the numbers that they're gathering are pretty staggering. I mean, most estimates say that worldwide in 2017, about $1 billion changed hands. So if you've got $1 billion all in Bitcoin and you're able to make the price skyrocket because of this WannaCry attack, well, now they've made a lot of money without even having to worry about whether businesses pay or not. And the reason why that's very scary is twofold. One, it shows you the sophistication of these guys, right? It goes back to the idea that this is organized crime and they're thinking 2, 3, 4 steps ahead of the authorities. But it also is scary because it really takes the business out of things. They don't care if they're going to pay you or not. They don't care whether they're going to give you your data back or not. It's not this honest business transaction, right? We're dealing with these criminals, and so they don't really have any motivation to give you the data back or not. Maybe they will. I mean, estimates right now say worldwide about 75% of the folks that pay the ransom get some of their data back. 1 in 4 don't get any of their data back despite paying the ransom. And within that 75%, some of them get all of their data back. Some of them get some of their systems back online. A lot of times you'll have to pay a ransom and they'll say, okay, great. Now that's your down payment. Here's your second payment request, and so on and so forth. So they could try to squeeze as much money out of you as possible. But again, the idea is that they were able to really capitalize on the fact that they had this huge pot of money tied up in Bitcoin. And now they've become extremely successful. And so my theory is that this big sell-off really started with these criminals cashing out and saying, now I can make a lot of this money. And so, again, it's a pretty scary venture. And to go back to who's being targeted, like I said, a lot of the folks that you're going to read about in the paper are going to be the large sensational organizations, right? You probably saw the University of Calgary. They paid $20,000 a couple of years back from ransomware. It was one of the largest early payments up in Canada. Even more recently, there was, the Progressive Conservative Party were hit. A news story came out in January, but they were actually hit with ransomware back in November. And so really that's something that's sensationalized, right? And there was an undisclosed Canadian firm that paid the largest single ransomware payment in the history of the country of $425,000 to recover from a ransomware attack. This was made public by some security firms, but they wouldn't release what company that was. But these are the stories that are gonna make the news. The reality is this is only a small portion of both the dollars that are being spent on ransomware and the folks that are getting attacked. The more common victim looks just like this. This is a woman, Sharon McKeel. She runs a dog rescue center out in Ontario, and so she got hit with ransomware. She's a single person nonprofit just trying to rescue dogs, right? It's called Bark. And she gets hit with ransomware. She had no protection. She didn't even know what was happening. She had to call her next door neighbor, who was also her /tech person, to come over and figure out what's going on. I have this scary red screen on my computer. I can't unlock it. What's going on? And pretty quickly that IT neighbor said, okay, it looks like you got hit with ransomware and you don't have any kind of backup that's going to allow you to restore your things. You're going to have to go out and find some Bitcoin to pay these criminals if you want to get all your data back. And that's exactly what they did. They searched all around and they tried to find a place where they could find Bitcoin. And after about a week's time, they did find it. The good news for Sharon was that the Canadian press picked up this story. Somebody had leaked it to the press that this was happening, and a bunch of Bitcoin buyers went out and raised some money to reimburse her for the money that she spent, and you get this feel-good story, right? She gets her money back that she spent, and they hand the check over, and it's great. Everybody pats themselves on the back. This type of story is few and far between in terms of somebody getting their money back. This is a great feel-good story. Not a lot of these businesses could do that. But more importantly, when you think about it, she didn't protect anything. She got her money back, but what's to say the next time she's not going to hit again? These criminals are smart. Is it easier for a criminal to go out and try to find a new victim, or to keep attacking a victim that they know will pay? So chances are she's going to be a great target to get hit again. And that's the thing you should really take away from this story. But beyond that, it also shows that even a one-person nonprofit working out of their home is just as susceptible to one of these ransomware attacks as a large corporation. And for the most part, small to mid-sized businesses aren't able to recover from the impact of loss of downtime and data loss. And I mentioned about $1 billion changed hands. That was between July 1st, 2016 and July 1st, 2017. Those are the numbers that have kind of been agreed on by all the authorities around the world, about $1 billion. But when you look at the actual impact to the business community, that number skyrockets to $75 billion. And the reason for this number is because this number also includes the cost of data loss. I mentioned the folks that pay the ransom and never get their data back, but also the folks that try to recover and can't get all their data back, don't pay. But also, more importantly, the cost of downtime, the cost of being down for several days. These are not only costly, but oftentimes it's enough to put a business out of business. And when you look at the leverage that these criminals have, it's twofold. And this graph on your screen now represents their two pieces of leverage. Now, that star out on the left-hand side of the screen represents your last backup. It's what we call your recovery point objective. Very simply, how much data at any given time are you at risk of losing? If you're backing up your data every week, then you're running the risk of losing a week's worth of data. And for different businesses, that might be fine. Weekly backups are fine. For other businesses, you need a daily backup. For other businesses, it needs to be hourly or even shorter. So the idea is to figure out what you can deal with, right? How quickly you need to, how much data you're at risk of losing. So that's your RPO. So that is clearly the first piece of leverage that they have. Once they've encrypted your data, now they're saying, okay, hey, are you backing it up? Most people are backing it up. But secondly, are you backing it up often enough? All right, if you're backing up weekly, is that an aggressive enough RPO schedule where they're going to say, okay, you could either pay me $3,000 or lose a week's worth of data? Well, a lot of times that week's worth of data is more costly than the $3,000 in ransom. That's why they get a lot of payments. And the third thing is, are you testing your backups? If you're not testing your backups, there's no way you could answer that RPO question. Because you could say, hey, we take hourly backups. We've been taking them for years. and it's great. And then you get hit with ransomware, and you go to restore from that backup, and you come to find, hey, our backups have been failing for 3 weeks. Now this RPO star has jumped from 1 hour to 3 weeks. And so you have to be able to back up your data whenever you want, but you also have to be able to test that backup and try to test it regularly. But let's just say that you've got a strong backup solution, and you're testing those backups, and the RPO is aggressive enough for you. That's great. Now you've taken out one of their legs. You've taken out one piece of their leverage, that left-hand side of the screen. The other piece of leverage that the criminals know that they have is that downtime. And so that star out on the right-hand side represents your recovery time objective. How much downtime can you absorb before it seriously starts to impact your business? And that goes back to what kind of backup do you have, and how quickly would you be able to get back up and running? Most businesses that I talk to all around the world can't answer that question. If our systems were to go down for whatever reason, a server failure, if you are hit with ransomware, how long would we be down before all of our systems are back up online? Criminals know that most businesses are using a traditional form of backup, and then that recovery time is going to be several days, if not several weeks, depending on how you're backing up your data. And they know that that is going to be very costly. So now if they're asking you for $3,000, then you say, okay, I have a backup solution. It's going to take me 3 days. That downtime is very oftentimes going to be a lot more than the $3,000 that they're asking for. And so that's the second piece of leverage. And so the idea here is, how do we reduce that? There's a lot of ways you could reduce that left-hand side of the screen through traditional backup, but traditional backup typically is not going to help you on that right-hand side of the screen. That right-hand side of the screen is really what makes up the bulk of that $75 billion number, the cost of downtime and the ripple effects that occurs. And so at Datto, back in 2016, we did a ransomware survey all around the world. We also specified it to different countries. And then in 2017, we updated it. And so we did one specifically for Canada. And we knew from 2016 that the numbers were going to be pretty staggering, but they were even more staggering than we had anticipated. We were interviewing and surveying folks in the managed services arena, right? So folks like eTech from all over Canada. And 6 and 7 of those folks that handle outsourced IT for mostly small to mid-sized businesses, had at least one client victimized by ransomware. 6 and 7. Now this attack, this ransomware report, we started the survey in July. So it was after the WannaCry attack. And so we looked at the first half of 2017 alone. 6 and 10, 60% had at least one client hit with ransomware in the first 6 months of last year. So the number's pretty staggering. Looking at 60% of these outsourced IT companies have at least one. Most of them reported multiple attacks. Of the folks that were attacked, only 29% were reported to authorities. This is one of the reasons why it's very hard to pinpoint the actual cost and the actual impact of these ransomware attacks. But what this also shows you is that most of the victims were in the small business arena, because most of these folks, they don't want to go through filing all police reports and trying to go to authorities when they know chances are these guys aren't going to get caught. They just need to get back up and running. And so they're going to pay the ransom and just get back up and running. And also, they don't want the news report to come out that they were hit with ransomware, because look at the impact that might cause on their clients. You don't want to be known as the company that was hit with ransomware and have to pay a ransom, and my data wasn't backed up properly and wasn't secure. So we're looking at less than 3 in 10 are being reported to the authorities up in Canada. Now, this number is also pretty staggering and pretty surprising, because like I said, you see the stories about the $20,000 that the University of Calgary paid and the $425,000 that undisclosed company paid. But when we look at the average payment that these small businesses are paying, it's actually around $2,000. It's not a lot of money. And that shows you that the typical target is a small business, because they know those are the people that tend to pay the most. But of the $1 billion over that course of 1 year, $5.7 million of that came from Canadian businesses. Now think about breaking down $5.7 million into $2,000 increments. How many people got hit? How big is that net of small businesses that got hit? And then beyond that, how many people didn't have any other recourse but to pay? So we're looking at a large amount of companies being hit. The estimate was around 1 in 20 up in Canada. 1 in 20 small businesses were hit last year. Off the surface, that might not seem like a lot. You could probably look out of your window right now and see 20 businesses. 1 in 20 of those guys got hit in a single year. And it's growing year by year. That's what we're talking about. And of the victims that got hit and had a traditional form of backup, 57% reported data loss. That, again, feeds into that $75 billion number. But more importantly, 75%, 3 in 4, reported business-threatening downtime, enough downtime where it was hard for them to stay in business. And it's much more impactful in the small business community because a lot of times you just don't have the resources to stay up and running when you're down for several days, if not several weeks, both in lost revenue, lost clients, and all the rest. And so to me, the last number I'm going to share with you is, to me, the most surprising. So the first number is pretty obvious. 90% of the managed service providers, the folks like eTech around Canada, were highly concerned about ransomware. That was a slight uptick from 2017. It was 88%, but we know this, right? These guys live and breathe this IT stuff. They understand their clients are getting hit with ransomware, so they're really concerned about it, and they're really trying to get their clients protected. But of the small business owners, last year it was 34%. This survey, remember, was done after the WannaCry attack, after a story came out that was on the front page of every paper, as I mentioned, a top lead story everywhere you looked. I thought this number would have jumped way up. It only ticked up 4 points. Only 38%, less than 4 in 10 small business owners are highly concerned about ransomware, a billion-dollar multinational enterprise. Only 4 in 10, less than 4 in 10 of those business owners are concerned, and the criminals love this number because they know they can keep going after these folks. Nobody's going to be protected, and they're going to continue to increase the amount of money that they can make. And those are our numbers that we did internally, but the U.S. and Canadian government last year put out an alert, actually a couple years ago put out an alert about ransomware, trying to get ahead of the curve here, and they put out a list of the common variants that were out there, the things to look out for in terms of what these criminals are trying to do to get in, and then they came up with a list of recommendations. And obviously on the surface you're going to think, okay, the recommendations are going to be, how do I prevent these guys from getting in? But instead their number one recommendation was to employ a data backup and recovery plan for all your critical information. All the law enforcement agencies from any country I've gone to talk about this stuff, they will say the same thing. If you get hit with ransomware, don't come to the government and expect that they're going to be able to unencrypt your data, because they're not. And beyond that, they're probably not going to catch these guys. So you've got two options. You could either pay the ransom, and they're going to give you reasons why you shouldn't do that. In their mind, it's going to embolden these criminals to keep attacking more and more businesses. But in terms of what matters to you, again, like I mentioned, only 75% get any of their data back. Plus, it puts that bigger bullseye on your back. Once you pay once, they're going to say, okay, I'm going to keep attacking this business until they say that they're not going to pay anymore, until they actually upgrade their IT services where they're in a position where they don't have to pay. And we're seeing a lot of companies get hit multiple times. And if you aren't cleaning up your server or replacing your server, most times those variants are living dormant in your system, and they're just going to pop up automatically again to try to encrypt your data. And so if you don't want to pay, your other recourse is to restore from a backup, and that's why the type of backup you have is very critical. And so most folks that are listening are going to say, okay, I have a backup solution. There's very few businesses that I talk to anywhere of any kind of shape or size, or they're not backing up their data. Most people are backing it up. Most people are using traditional forms of backup, whether it's an external hard drive that employees are backing up their data weekly and bringing it home with them. We still see tape backup, despite its pretty high failure rates. We're still seeing tape backup all over the world. We're seeing a big shift to cloud backup, which is great, getting that data off-site, which is great, but there are limitations to all of these traditional forms of backup. You're going to see higher failure rates, especially if you're using USB sticks, or you're using a external hard drive, or especially tape. Tape, some of the studies are showing 30 to 50% failure rate, and beyond. And so you're seeing that. You're seeing that most of these things, they're going to be manual testing, and not just testing after the backup occurred, but a manual way of backing it up. You're actually introducing a person in there to actually manually take those backups, and we all know the more people that are involved, the higher risk for user error. And when there's manual testing involved, that tends to be the thing that people don't do. They're going to make sure the backup's done. They're not going to go and be religious about going and testing those backups. Slow recovery time. Again, think about that chart I showed you before, that right-hand side of the screen. Most of these traditional forms of backup are going to take several days, if not several weeks, to get that data back. If you're using a cloud backup, that's great. I know a lot of folks are shifting to that, but if you ever tried to pull data back down from the web, have you ever tried, if you've got several terabytes of data, have you ever tried to bring that down? It's going to be very lengthy to do that. And there's going to be ways maybe you could pay to get that expedited, but that's going to be a slow recovery time. And then lastly, there's a higher risk of infection or theft. These are typically the things that you're kind of buying over the counter. They don't have the resources to go in there and protect your data, but also there's a risk of just straight theft. There might be somebody that comes into your office and can break in and just steal the backup on its own. And so there's a higher risk of that as well. And so how does business continuity differ from that? What's the difference between a traditional form of backup and business continuity? And how does that help you combat these criminals? Well, first and foremost, you do want to have a hybrid solution. It's important to have an on-premise device to be backing up that server that you're asking it to back up, or multiple servers. That way, if you just got to do a regular file level restore, or you have to do a virtualization, which I'm going to get into, you could do that right off of that local device. But beyond that, you want to have redundancy on different geographical locations. You don't want your only backup to be on-premise or even just 1 mile up the road, because if there is some sort of natural disaster or something like that, well, anything that impacts your systems very well might impact your backup. And then so a hybrid solution has the theory that we're going to have an on-premise backup, but also multiple copies of your data off-site. That's why the 2 data centers that I mentioned are very important. They're going to be on opposite sides of the country. So we've got one data center in Toronto. If you're located in Toronto, in something truly catastrophic were to happen and it impacts your business and that on-premise device, and also for whatever reason impacts our data center, well, you're still protected because you've got that third copy of your data on the other side of the country. So multiple copies of your data in different geographical locations is key, really, for anything, not just to combat against these criminals. You also want it to be automated. Again, users make errors, and so taking the user error out of things is very important. And the automation doesn't just occur on the actual backup. You're going to be able to set your schedule for however often you want, and those backups are going to start occurring, but also on the testing. You want to have an automated testing system in place. I mean, us particularly, we have what's called screenshot verification, which means that we're testing those backups, and we're also testing its virtualization capabilities. And as I mentioned, I'm going to get to that in a minute. But a very critical component to intelligent business continuity is it's an image-based backup. Most traditional form of backups, basically all of them, are based on backing up a certain amount of files and folders. You're going to tell it which files and folders to back up. You're going to back those up, and at the end of the day, you've just got those files and folders backed up. An image-based solution does it a lot differently. It actually takes a snapshot of that entire server that's being backed up. So you're not just capturing files and folders anymore. You're capturing the applications, the operating systems. Everything that was on that server is going to be mirrored to that on-premise device, and then subsequently replicated to those 2 data centers. So you've got the ability to capture everything. There's going to be no missed volumes, but more importantly, because we have captured everything, we have the ability to virtualize. And what virtualization means is, because everything that lived on that server lives on this on-premise device, if something were to happen to that server, whether it's a ransomware attack, whether that server goes down for whatever reason, you're able to spin up a virtual machine right from that on-premise device. And everybody who was accessing that original server that's now been infected or damaged or for whatever's going on with it is now going to be running off of that on-premise device. That's going to be operating as your server. You'll be able to make changes to all the data on there and able to keep your business up and running. The idea with virtualization is, yes, we're backing up your data. We're going to set those schedules. We'll take care of the left-hand side of the screen. What virtualization allows you to do is take care of that right-hand side of the screen, reduce that downtime. Instead of waiting to recover all those files, you could spin up a virtual instance in a matter of minutes or hours instead of days or weeks, getting your business up and running. That really takes the leverage out of both sides of things. And so I'll give you a couple real examples of what the cost of downtime actually looks like, and you could scale it down to whatever industry you're in. One of the big stories that I've been going around and telling was the San Francisco Metro Transit Authority. They were hit with ransomware on Black Friday, day after Thanksgiving in the States, which is the largest shopping day of the year. They're hit with ransomware. They were asked for $73,000 in ransom. And to their credit, they immediately put out a statement acknowledging they were hit with ransomware and also stating they have no intent of paying these criminals. They didn't want to pay because that's what the government tells them not to do, but also they have a very robust backup solution. And so they huddled their IT team together and they said, okay, how long is it going to take to get all these systems up online? Now, the systems that were hit, this is why the criminals are very smart, were the fare collection systems for both the bus system and the light rail. So they weren't able to collect fares while these systems were down. Their IT team gets together. They had done multiple tests. They were very confident that all their systems would be back up online first thing Sunday morning. So now they're staring at, okay, we're going to be down for 2 days. What do we do? First option is to shut down the light rail and the bus system. that might sound like an option, but in real purposes, there's no way they could shut down the light rail in the bus system. It would really just bring the entire city to a halt, but also it's busiest shopping days of the year. It's really going to have a huge impact on their retail, so they don't want to do that. So their second option is the one they went with, which was, we're going to give away free rides. The city of San Francisco was thrilled, right? Everybody gets to ride the light rail and the bus system for free, and so they're back up online on Sunday, and really nobody was following up with stories as to what the true impact was. Now, they never put out a statement saying how much money they lost, but they do have a lot of information on their website, so I'm able to do the math for them. They're down for 2 days, 2 busiest shopping days of the year. Now, they, on their website, state that they provide 735,000 rides every day. I would assume that those numbers are higher on those 2 days, but let's just take their numbers. They're saying 735,000 rides a day. They also state that it's $1 to ride the bus and $2.25 to ride the light rail. So if they're down for 2 days, they lost anywhere between $1.5 and $3.3 million. And remember, they could have paid $73,000 in ransom. They didn't do that. Instead, they decided to go the other route and absorb that downtime, and now they basically lost several millions of dollars that they never would have gotten back. And so this is that right-hand side. This is what makes up that $75 billion. And just 2 weeks ago, I was in Manhattan, and the head of cybersecurity from the FBI was the keynote. So I was actually speaking in a side room after his presentation and a bunch of breakout sessions. But he told the same story. He referenced the San Francisco Metro Transit Authority. He was talking about the impact. He doesn't do this math. He says, I don't know how much money they lost, but I can tell you that if this same thing happened in New York City with our subway system and our bus system, we'd lose $50 million in revenue every day. It would have been a $100 million impact. And I came right from the FBI down in the States, the head of cybersecurity. This is the type of impact that these type of attacks happen. Again, this is me doing the math. This is the FBI doing math. No real tangible numbers. So I've got another story that shows you tangible stories, that shows you tangible numbers that are confirmed by a third party. There was a utility company in Lansing, Michigan. They have hit with ransomware. Again, this was another company that had a very robust IT team. They had 51 folks that they were employing on their IT team. So originally they said, okay, we're going to be able to recover. We're not paying this $25,000. And after a day of trying to recover, they realized this was going to take too long, and so they paid the ransom. Their general manager basically said, we have no other recourse but to pay this ransom, or we're never going to get our data back. And so what they did was they went to their cybersecurity insurance. I actually heard this story while sitting on a panel next to a gentleman who sold cybersecurity insurance. And he told the story basically to say, hey, this is why you need cybersecurity insurance. But as I'm hearing the story, I'm thinking to myself, hey, this is a real life example of what that cost of downtime is. So afterwards, I picked his brain. I went and Googled some things and found some real numbers. So they were actually down, even though they paid the ransom. It took them a full week to get all their systems back up online, a full week. And so what they did was they put together a claim to submit to their cybersecurity insurance. The total number they came up with for their downtime and their disruption in their business was $2.4 million. Now, they acknowledged $400,000 of that was upgrades to their IT systems, which they wouldn't be able to submit as a cybersecurity claim. So they needed to do all these things to prevent the next attack. So finally, they settled on a number of $2 million. They submitted a claim in just downtime of $2 million. The insurance company looked at it. They looked at the claim, and they wound up writing a check for $1.9 million. There was a $100,000 deductible. Now, my experience with insurance companies, they don't tend to pay out on claims that aren't real. And so they looked at it. They justified that these numbers were real, and they paid out the $1.9 million. So this gentleman who was up telling the story, he's saying this is why you need cybersecurity insurance, and that's a great conversation to have. But I'm thinking to myself, okay, not only does this justify the story that I've been telling about the cost of downtime, but it also shows, look at the impact. I mean, not only were they down for a week, they still had to pay the $400,000 to upgrade all their systems. They still lost the $100,000 in their deductible. And as I followed up and looked at other stories that I found on Google, I found a story that said that within 6 months of this attack, 25% of their IT staff had quit. It became such a toxic environment trying to recover all these things. They said, I'm not getting paid enough for this. I'm going to quit. So after all of that, you look at ripple effects, they then have to go and replace 25% of their IT team. That's an industry that doesn't have a lot of people sitting on the sidelines. So that's going to take them several months and several, tens of thousands of dollars in recruitment fees and all the rest to try to do that. Those are the impacts, and those are real numbers justified by a third party. And so, how are these guys getting in? How did these guys get in? Typically, it's an email. That's still the typical way that these criminals are getting in. And an example that was given during a presentation I gave, again, alongside another FBI agent was, all right, I'm going to show you how simple this is. And he's given a presentation to about 150 people in the crowd. And in the middle of his scary presentation, he shows a picture of a house. He says, hey, anybody recognize this house? Everybody's kind of looking around at each other. And a couple of seconds later, a guy in the back of the room says, hey, that's my house. And he goes, oh, it's your house. It's a gorgeous house. He goes, and you just got a promotion at work, right? Congratulations. And you graduated from Penn State University in 2002. That's a great school. And he starts rattling off all these statistics about this guy. And he stops and he says, I bet you think I use all the resources I have here at the FBI to go out and gather this information. It's actually the exact opposite. I didn't use any of my resources. What I did was I talked to the organizer of the event. I got a registration list. I picked one of you at random. The first thing I did was I went to your LinkedIn profile. You got a lot of very valuable information to me as a criminal right on your LinkedIn profile. After I spent a couple minutes on there, I went and found your Facebook page. That's where I got this gorgeous picture of your house. Then I looked for you on Twitter, and I looked for you on Instagram and all these different places. Now, if I'm a criminal, within 15 minutes, I can get a very good idea of who you are and who you work for and all the rest. So I'm going to start with just picking off the low-hanging fruit. I'm going to start by looking who your coworkers are. Now I'm going to create a dummy email account that's going to look like it's coming from one of your coworkers with a hyperlink in there that's they're going to try to get you to click on that link. And if that doesn't work, I'm going to go a little deeper and say, hey, let me think about this. Penn State University's got one of the biggest alumni associations in the world. I'm going to assume you get a lot of emails from them. So I'm going to find a template that looks just like the alumni emails that come out, and it's going to have an email that says, hey, click here on this link for all the information you need to know about our 15-year reunion festivities. And you're going to click on it because it looks like every other email you've gotten. And then I've got you. And then I'm going to go down the list, and eventually I'm going to get you on a day. It's a Friday afternoon. You're trying to clean up your inbox. You got 50 emails to go through, and you're clicking through it. I'm going to get you asleep at the wheel, and you're going to click on that, and that's how I get you. Again, this shows the sophistication. It's not the emails that come out from your long-lost supposed uncle that says $75,000, I'm going to send you $1 million. That's not what's happening anymore. Nobody's falling for that. This is going to be a very sophisticated, socially engineered spear phishing attack where they're going to gather as much information about you and your business as possible. So when that email comes out, it's going to look like every other email in your inbox. That's what we're dealing with in terms of what to look out for. And so where does business continuity fit in? And this is how we'll close it out. I mean, think about if either one of those two examples had a business continuity solution and their servers were hit by ransomware. You get that scary red screen that says, click here to pay me my ransom. Because everything that lived on that server that was infected lives on that on-premise device, you'd call up Ian and his team, and he'd spin up a virtual machine in a matter of minutes or hours, depending on the size of your system, and get you back up and running. It's truly business as normal. It's not just saying, okay, your data is safe. It's saying you could actually work right off of this on-premise device. You're going to be able to make changes. It's a true production environment. So when that server is wiped clean or replaced, we could do a bare metal restore and get all of those changes, all of that data that you made changes on over the course of a week or 2 weeks or however long you're in that virtualized state, and get you back to where you were the moment you wanted to get back, not just to where you were when that ransomware attack occurred, truly where you were at when you're ready to get back to a traditional server. So the benefits are really clear. You're going to reduce that downtime. Take care of that right-hand side of the screen that we've been talking about. Take care of that downtime because that's the piece of leverage that they have. It's going to help your RTO and your RPO because you're going to be able to answer those questions. And you're able to set those schedules so how often you want that data backed up, and the data is going to be tested. That screenshot verification I mentioned is going to test these virtualization capabilities. All this cool stuff that's on the screen right now, what we do is every night we actually spin up a virtual machine in the background, bring it up to a boot screen, that start screen, take a snapshot of it, send it off to Ian and his team and say, yes, not only is the backup valid, the data is there, but the virtualization capabilities have been tested as well. So you're going to know that RTO number, and you're going to know that RPO number because that data has been tested. And then lastly, you have the ability to do all of these features, either locally from that on-premise device, but if that on-premise device is compromised, if it's damaged, if there's a fire in your building, if whatever happens, you could do the same thing off-site in either one of our data centers. I mean, the big test for us at Datto at the time, and we're located in Connecticut, right on Long Island Sound, about 40 minutes east of Manhattan. So when Hurricane Sandy happened in 2012, that was our biggest test. Most of our clients in that time were right on the East Coast. And so what happened was we had thousands of businesses, all shapes and sizes, all different industries, living out of our cloud, running their businesses out of our data center. And they were doing that for weeks on end as their server rooms were drained out, new racks were being put in, and all the rest. And not only were we able to keep them in business, think about how many of those would not have survived. Think about this 75% number that we talked about before when you look at the cost of downtime and the impact of downtime putting businesses out of business. And at the end of Hurricane Sandy, we were able to put out a statement that said not only did we keep these businesses up and running, but we didn't lose a single piece of data from anyone that was impacted by Hurricane Sandy. And that really is what propelled us into a global company. And so you have these abilities either from the local device or from the cloud. You have a lot of ways to really protect yourself. And so when you start looking at next steps, the very first step you should do is perform a network assessment. This is where Ian and his team could be a great resource. Let them come in and look at what your solution is right now. Is it adequate? There's a chance that maybe whatever you have in place right now is adequate for your business, but you won't know that until there's a network assessment done, until they could actually tell you what you have and whether that's ready to go. You want to create an incident response plan. This is critical as well. What this means is everyone in your business needs to know if something were to happen, if you see that scary red screen, who do I call? What do I do? Do I unplug my computer? What are those steps? Because you will see employees that get infected with ransomware and they're scared to go down the hall and tell their boss, hey, I think I just infected our network. And so they just sit there. Maybe they turn off their monitor. Maybe they go and they take a break. They don't know what to do. There needs to be a true plan in place, just like you have fire drills in your building and all the rest. There should be, everyone in your company should know exactly what that plan looks like. And then you really have to have an ongoing education plan. You need to have folks understand what those phishing schemes look like. That example I gave with the house and the LinkedIn profiles and how they're going to use emails that look like every other email in your inbox, whether it's from a vendor, whether it's from your mailing vendor, all the rest. So they know something looks a little different about this. And ultimately creating that culture of security so that everybody knows exactly what's expected of them and having an ongoing plan. We're going to review this quarterly. We're going to review this annually, whatever it is. There's a culture of security. We find that businesses that have these just have ongoing education. There's a huge decrease in incidents with ransomware because there's folks looking out for it. And so with that, I am going to turn it over to some questions. We've got all of eTech's information up on screen. Again, I would highly encourage you go out and do that and set up that network assessment. So I'm going to take a look at the chat box. If you have any questions, there's that chat box. You could enter some questions in there. I'm going to start with the first one here, Ian. Okay. All right. So what's the common, I guess this is an easy one. So what's the common RTO and a traditional backup solution? I'll take a first stab at that, Ian, and then you can maybe chime in. I mean, what we've seen, and it's going to depend on exactly what you have, obviously, but I mentioned if you've just got a cloud backup solution, one of those, kind of ones that you hear about on the radio and those type of things, I've seen numbers of a week or more to get that data back. And maybe, we're talking about 2 weeks. If it's a tape backup, again, we're looking at a week plus to be able to restore all those systems. If it's a file level backup, remember, before you can go in and get those systems back up online, you need to get a new server in place. You need to install those applications, the operating systems, all the rest, and then you could bring those files over. So again, usually it's several days. Ian, what do you normally see out there with somebody with a traditional backup? How long are they typically down?
Well, obviously with traditional backup, they're not going to be able to get up and running in a matter of hours. As a matter of fact, we had a client just 2 weeks ago. They're a 5-user Canadian National Association, and we implemented Datto solution for them, and we managed their IT, and they gave our help desk a call, and their Exchange server crashed. So in this case, it wasn't ransomware. It was just a hardware failure, just a 5-user. They're running small business server locally. So we were able to just spin up their Exchange server on the local Datto device, and the users were seamlessly able to log into the device and continue using their Outlook, which is of course mission critical for their organization. If you cannot send or receive emails, no one can work these days. And then from there, we had a good conversation with them, and we talked them into, or just recommended that they move to the cloud for Office 365. So while their main server was down, they were able to run their email on a local Datto device, and we were able to get them up and running within about 2 hours. And in that time, we had time now to migrate them to Office 365. So that was really a nice success story for us. So we're not aware of too many business today that can go a full day of downtime.
Yeah, I think that's actually a fantastic example, and it actually feeds into the next question, which I think you should probably take a stab at. But the question is, how long does it normally take to virtualize? I mean, I can give you the stock Datto answer, which is going to be very aggressive, but you actually live and breathe this stuff. I mean, you mentioned 2 hours for that particular client. What do you normally see? How quickly do you normally see that virtualization able to occur?
It all depends on obviously the RPO that you talked about, the recovery point, and the RTO, the recovery time. So with all our clients, the first thing we want to know is, can you be down? If you were down, how long can you be down? So if a client says, well, we understand we're not 911 or anything like that, right? So, I mean, we can absorb maybe 2 hours, 4 hours a day. So that's how we build our recovery time based on how long they can be down. So we usually around 2 to 4 hours. So and in that time, what we're doing is first you have to troubleshoot to see if there's actually what the problem is, because sometimes you can resolve the issue in that time. But once you realize that this is a disaster, we have to implement our DR services. That's when the clock starts ticking for RTO. So we want to get them up and running within the parameters that we set for the recovery time objective. And there's one just last thing, I got a question on this that I see. A lot of companies, and we're hearing a lot about this, if we get hit with ransomware, should we pay the ransom? So there's even in your presentation, Michael, there's really 2 schools of thought here, because you can even pay the ransom and just pray that you're going to be able to get your files back unencrypted. And sometimes even if you do pay the ransom, the downtime, the time that you were down, the cost is still more than what you pay for the ransom. So I know that from experience and working with customers that have been hit, our first recommendation is to not pay the ransom. But I think in some cases, a client will have to pay the ransom if they're not protected.
Yeah, it's exactly right. I mean, the downtime will occur whether you pay the ransom or not. So that's a great point. I don't see any other questions come in. If anybody has another one, we got a couple minutes. But if you do have any other questions, I know a lot of folks don't like to ask the questions on the webinar. You've got all of the contact information you need to ask those questions. Again, I emphasize when we talk about next steps, the easiest thing to do is just go out and do a network assessment. Everybody's network is different. Everybody's RPO needs and RTO needs are different. The only way you could do that is to sit down with the ETIC folks and really say, okay, well, what do I have? Are they aggressive enough for what I need? And it might be something you've never really thought about. So I highly encourage that. And obviously, any other questions you have, just reach out. And hopefully, everybody got something out of this. We did record this webinar, so if there's folks in your office you want to share this with, or you want to go back and listen to some of those statistics and some of those stories, that'll be sent out to you probably later today. So, Ian, do you have anything to add before we close it out?
Just thank you very much, Michael, for taking the time. It was an excellent webinar. I learned a lot about especially the statistics and how Bitcoin has evolved over the years, and it's definitely the criminals who are driving the price of Bitcoin. So again, appreciate it, and thank you everyone for joining our webinar. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much.